All right, strap yourselves in because today we're going deep on a case that is both fascinating and disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about the Weepy-Voiced Killer, Paul Michael Stephani,
Right.
terrorized the Twin Cities back in the early 80s.
A case that, well, really kind of throws a wrench in our typical understanding of serial killers, you know?
Yeah.
He didn't just commit these awful crimes. He called the police,
Right.
confessed in this high-pitched, almost childlike voice,
Yeah.
and practically begged them to catch him.
Yeah, you think about the typical serial killer.
Right.
They try to blend in, cover their tracks.
Right.
This guy was practically begging for attention.
Yeah.
It's like a paradox.
See,
A
that's
killer who wants to get caught.
exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, right?
Yeah.
We're going to be sifting through police reports, court transcripts, psych evils,
Wow.
all trying to understand what drove Paul Michael Stephani to do what he did.
We're going to look at his background, the
Oh.
crimes themselves, the calls, the capture, everything. And hopefully, by the end, we'll have a better grasp on this complex and truly unsettling case.
For sure.
So to start, let's paint a picture of who Paul Michael Stephani was before he became known as the Weepy-Voiced Killer.
Okay, so
He was born in 1944, the second oldest in a family of 10 children.
10 kids.
10 kids. Wow, I can only imagine that kind of chaos.
Yeah, and to add to that,
Yeah.
he had an abusive stepfather, which definitely paints a picture of difficult childhood.
That's heartbreaking, and it makes you wonder how much his childhood experiences played a role in his later actions.
Yeah, it's a common theme in criminal psychology, right?
Right.
The idea that early trauma can have these long-lasting effects on behavior.
Yeah.
Now, we can't say for sure if it's a direct cause, but it's certainly something to consider.
Right. And unfortunately, his adult life didn't offer much stability either.
Yeah.
He had a failed marriage, a daughter he didn't really raise, and bounced from job to job.
Unstable.
He was even fired from a janitor position back in 1977.
And you want to hear something really eerie?
Oh, yeah.
His first victim's body was found near that same workplace.
Okay, now that's just creepy. Do you think it's just a coincidence? Or could it be something more?
It's impossible to say for sure,
Right.
but it certainly adds another layer to the story, doesn't it?
For sure. Okay. So let's move on to the first attack that really set this whole chilling saga in motion.
Right.
It was New Year's Eve, 1980.
1980.
A young woman named Karen Patak was brutally beaten in St. Paul.
Yeah, she was found with severe injuries, including brain damage.
Oh, wow.
It was a miracle she even survived.
Wow. And this is where the weepy voice makes its first appearance?
Exactly. Stephani called the police, distraught, claiming to have witnessed the attack.
Oh, wow.
He directed them to Karen, even expressed remorse for what had happened.
So he's already showing this contradictory behavior, committing a violent act, and then immediately reaching out to the police.
Yeah.
Almost confessing.
It's a bizarre mix of guilt and a need for attention. Almost like he couldn't bear the weight of his actions alone, but also couldn't stop himself from committing them.
Then just a few months later, in June of 1981, 18-year-old Kimberly Compton was stabbed to death in Minneapolis.
And guess what?
What?
Stephani called the police again, this time admitting to the stabbing.
Oh, wow.
He even said he couldn't control himself.
It's almost like he's playing this twisted game with the police.
Right.
Like he wants to be caught, but can't bring himself to actually turn himself in.
Right, and it wasn't just a one-time thing.
Oh, no.
He continued to call the police, confessing to crimes, expressing remorse,
Wow.
even correcting inaccuracies he found in the newspaper reports about the crimes.
What drives someone to do that?
Right.
It seems so counterintuitive to everything we think we know about criminals,
Yeah.
especially those who commit such violent acts.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are theories, of course. Some psychologists believe it could be a form of what we call inverted narcissism, where the individual craves attention and validation, even if it comes in the form of negative recognition.
So instead of seeking admiration, he's seeking infamy.
Precisely. He needs to be at the center of the story,
Right.
even if it's a horrific one.
Yeah.
And remember, this was the early 80s, before the 24-hour news cycle and social media.
So calling the police, getting his confession into the newspapers, that was his way of reaching a wider audience.
Right.
Of becoming notorious.
Exactly. And each call, each confession just added to the fear and fascination surrounding the case.
It's like he was feeding off that fear,
Yeah.
using it to fuel his own twisted desires.
Now, the next murder we need to discuss is where the pattern deviates a bit.
Okay.
In 1982, Kathleen Greening was found drowned in her bathtub.
Right.
But this time, there was no weepy call,
Hmm.
no confession.
Why the change? Was he trying to throw the police off his trail? Or was something else going on?
That's a question investigators and psychologists have debated for years,
Right.
Did he feel differently about this victim? Was he experimenting with a different approach?
Right.
Or maybe he simply slipped up,
Yeah.
forgot his usual routine. It's hard to say,
Yeah.
but it's certainly a curious anomaly in this otherwise consistent pattern.
It is, but then, as if to reaffirm his signature, the weepy voice returns.
Yeah.
This time, it's after the murder of Barbara Simons, a 40-year-old nurse who was stabbed 40 times.
40 times.
40 times. That's just brutal.
Brutal.
And he called the police again.
He did, and he didn't just confess.
No?
He revealed details about the crime scene, things only the killer would know.
Oh, wow.
It was as if he was taunting the police,
Hmm.
proving he was always one step ahead.
It's like a terrifying game of cat and mouse, with the lives of his victims as the stakes.
And unfortunately for Stephani, this twisted game was about to come to an end.
Yeah.
His next attack on August 21st, 1982, would prove to be his undoing.
This is the attack on Denise Williams, right?
That's right. Denise Williams, a sex worker, would inadvertently become the key to bringing the Weepy-Voiced Killer to justice.
So we're talking about Denise Williams,
Yeah.
a sex worker who Stephani attacked on August 21st, 1982.
Right.
What happened?
This attack was a turning point in the case because Denise fought back.
Oh, wow.
She managed to injure Stephani during the struggle.
Wow, good for her.
Yeah.
But how did that lead to his capture?
Well, injured and desperate,
Right.
Stephani went to the hospital for treatment,
Okay.
and that's where it all unraveled for him.
Talk about ironic. The very act of seeking help for his injuries is what exposed him.
Right. It's like something out of a crime novel.
Yeah.
The police were already on high alert because of the Weepy-Voiced Killer case.
Right.
And when they heard about a man with stab wounds matching Denise's description, they put two and two together.
And I'm guessing Denise Williams was able to identify him.
She was.
Wow.
But even more damning, several people who knew Stephani, his ex-wife, his sister,
Right.
even a former roommate recognized the weepy voice from the police recordings.
So the voice that he thought was disguising him actually became his downfall.
Yeah.
It's like something out of a classic Greek tragedy.
It really is.
The very thing he used to try and control the narrative, to insert himself into the investigation,
Right.
ultimately led to his capture and conviction.
He's undoing.
He was found guilty of murder and attempted murder and sentenced to 58 years in prison.
Wow.
Case closed, right?
Not quite.
Uh-oh.
The story takes another unexpected turn in 1997.
Okay.
Stephani was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Oh, wow. So he knew he was dying.
He did.
Wow.
And facing his own mortality, he did something truly surprising.
Okay.
He confessed to all the murders,
Oh, wow.
including Kathleen Greening's death, which had remained unsolved.
Wait, so all this time, he'd been carrying that secret with him. Why confess then, when he was already in prison and facing a death sentence anyway?
That's a question that has puzzled everyone involved in the case.
Yeah.
Was it a genuine pang of conscience?
Right.
A desire to clear his slate before he died?
Maybe he wanted to control the narrative one last time.
Yeah.
Ensure that his name and his crimes would be remembered.
It's impossible to say for sure,
Right.
but it does add another layer of complexity to an already perplexing case.
So after looking at all the evidence, the crimes, the calls, the confessions, do we have any clearer understanding of what motivated Paul Michael Stephani? What made him tick?
It's difficult to pinpoint a single definitive answer,
Right.
but we can look at some of the prevailing theories in criminal psychology
Okay.
and see how they might apply.
Let's start with the weepy voice itself.
Okay.
What do you make of that?
It's a classic example of what we call a cry for help,
Right.
although a very distorted and manipulative one.
So he's committing these horrific acts, but at the same time, he's reaching out,
Right.
almost pleading for someone to stop him.
Exactly. It speaks to a deep internal conflict,
Right.
this battle between his darker impulses and a desire, however twisted, for redemption, or at least acknowledgement of his pain.
And what about the need for attention, the desire to be at the center of the story? Could that be tied to his troubled childhood?
Absolutely. I mean, when you grow up in a chaotic environment like that,
10 kids.
with 10 siblings and an abusive stepfather,
Right.
it's easy to feel invisible, unheard.
So maybe the crimes, the calls, the confessions,
Yeah.
it was all a way of finally making himself seen,
Right.
making himself matter.
It's a tragic and disturbing thought,
Yeah.
but it fits with what we know about Stephani
Right.
and the psychological profiles of many other serial offenders.
What about the theory of inverted narcissism? How does that fit into the picture?
That's another compelling piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
It suggests that Stephani wasn't seeking admiration or love,
Well-
but rather infamy, notoriety.
Like he wanted to become a legend, even if it was a legend built on fear and suffering.
Exactly. And the weepy voice becomes another tool in his arsenal,
Right.
a way of amplifying the drama, manipulating the public's perception of him.
It's a chilling thought, but it makes a certain kind of sense.
Yeah.
And it highlights the fact that there's no single easy explanation for why someone becomes a killer.
Right. It's always a complex interplay of factors.
Right.
Personality, upbringing, opportunity, mental health.
Right.
And in Stephani's case, there was also this twisted need for attention, this desire to control the narrative of his own life, even if it meant destroying the lives of others.
So where does that leave us? We've explored Stephani's past, his crimes, his motivations. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that even in the face of evil, of seemingly senseless acts of violence,
Right.
there's always a story, a context.
And that story, however disturbing, can teach us something.
Yeah, it can help us understand the roots of violence,
Right.
the factors that contribute to criminal behavior, and hopefully it can inspire us to find ways to prevent such tragedies from happening again.
So it's not just about solving the crime.
Right.
It's about understanding it, learning from it, and using that knowledge to make the world a safer place.
Exactly.
And what about Denise Williams,
Yeah.
the woman who fought back and ultimately helped bring Stephani to justice?
Her story is a testament to the power of courage and resilience.
Even in the face of unimaginable terror, she found the strength to fight back,
Right.
to protect herself. And in doing so, she helped bring an end to Stephani's reign of terror.
Her actions were heroic,
Mhm.
and they serve as an inspiration to us all.
For sure.
They remind us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope,
Yeah.
and that the human spirit can triumph over adversity.
Denise Williams' story is truly inspiring. It's a good reminder that sometimes even in the darkest situations, one person's bravery can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Her actions were pivotal in stopping Stephani and saving potentially countless lives. You know, it's a stark contrast to the passivity we often see in other cases,
Right.
where fear can paralyze people, prevent them from taking action.
It makes you wonder, though, could anything else have been done to stop Stephani sooner?
Mm-hmm.
Were there any red flags? Any missed opportunities?
That's a question that always comes up in these cases, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's easy to look back with hindsight and point to potential warning signs.
Well, he did have a history of instability. The troubled childhood, the failed marriage, the string of jobs, and those early calls to the police, even though they came after the attacks, seemed like pretty clear indicators that something was seriously wrong.
You're right. Those calls, even in their distorted form, were a plea for help. They were an opportunity for intervention.
Right.
But the challenge for law enforcement is recognizing those cries for help when they're masked by violence and manipulation.
It's like trying to decipher a coded message. How do you separate the genuine remorse from the attention-seeking, the desire to control the narrative?
It's incredibly difficult, and it's further complicated by the fact that we as a society often stigmatize mental illness.
Right.
People are afraid to seek help, afraid of being labeled, afraid of the consequences.
So someone like Stephani, struggling with these dark impulses, might have been even less likely to reach out for help, fearing judgment or rejection.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to have open conversations about mental health.
Right.
To create environments where people feel safe seeking help without shame or stigma.
Because early intervention could be the key. If someone like Stephani had felt comfortable reaching out for help, if there had been resources available to address his underlying issues, maybe things could have turned out differently.
It's a hopeful thought,
Yeah.
but it highlights the need for a more proactive approach to mental health.
Yeah.
We need to shift from a reactive system where we only intervene after a crisis to a preventative one, where we provide support and resources to those who are struggling before they reach a breaking point.
It's a complex issue, but it's one we need to address head-on. We can't afford to wait for another tragedy to happen before we take action.
And it's not just about law enforcement or mental health professionals. It's about all of us, as individuals and as a community, being more aware, more compassionate, more willing to reach out to those who might be struggling in silence.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the chilling case of the Weepy-Voiced Killer, I think it's important to remember that while this specific case is closed, the conversation about preventing violence, understanding criminal behavior, and promoting mental well-being is far from over.
This case serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary individuals.
Yeah.
But it also offers valuable lessons about the importance of early intervention, the power of resilience, and the need for a more compassionate and understanding approach to mental health.
If there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's the importance of asking questions, seeking understanding, and never losing sight of the human element in even the most horrific of crimes.
We can't change the past, but we can learn from it. By examining cases like this, by engaging in open and honest conversations, and by working together to address the root causes of violence, we can strive towards a future where tragedies like this become less frequent, where help is readily available, and where every individual feels seen, heard, and supported.
Well said. And on that note, that's our deep dive into the case of the Weepy-Voiced Killer.